What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 8 Monday Night Football.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
Okay guys, in this video, I'm going to give you my top DFS picks for this Monday Night Football showdown between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cleveland Browns. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, let's take a look at this Thursday Night Football showdown between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cleveland Browns. So at the quarterback position, this guy's been on fire. I like Joe Burrow from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Cleveland Browns, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Joe Burrow has averaged 26 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets an average of 4.3 rush attempts per game. Now, I don't have the ownership in quite yet, but I expect Joe Burrow to be about 60% owned. He's projected at 20 fantasy points here tonight. Joe Burrow is 11,400 DraftKings salary. I think I'm going to bump that projection up to 25 fantasy points. I think that he can get close to his season average here or even exceed it. So Joe Burrow has scored 42, 36, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And he got 3, 4, and 3 rush attempts in those games. So decent matchup here. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45 points scored in this game, with the Bengals favored by 3.5. So I like Joe Burrow here versus the Cleveland Browns. Okay, now if you want to save some salary, you could roll the dice with Jacoby Brissett. He's 9,200 DraftKings salary, but he's got like half the production here, only averaging 14.2 fantasy points per game on the season. And he's got a tough matchup here versus the Cincinnati Bengals, who have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing quarterbacks. So you could roll the dice here, try to save some money. Now, Jacoby Brissett, he does average 3.6 rush attempts per game. So there's a chance that he can find the end zone on the ground, give him some extra fantasy value. I'm going to go with Joe Burrow. I may make one contrarian lineup with Jacoby Brissett, but for the most part, I like Joe Burrow here versus the Cleveland Browns. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So stud on the slate, well, there's 2 studs on the slate. The most expensive stud is Nick Chubb from the Cleveland Browns, and Nick Chubb is averaging 21.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 18 rush attempts per game and 2 pass targets per game. He's projected at 16.4 fantasy points here tonight, and he's 10,400 DraftKings salary. So Nick Chubb has scored 19, 8, and 28 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 16, 12, and 17 rush attempts, on top of 3, 2, and 1 pass target. So I would like to see a little bit more consistent volume when paying money for a pick like this, although there's no doubt Nick Chubb is a stud. He's projected at 16.4 fantasy points here tonight, but he could easily go off for 20 plus fantasy points. He could have 2 or 3 touchdowns. This guy's a beast in the red zone. So I like Nick Chubb despite a bad matchup here versus the Cincinnati Bengals.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
All you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. we'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, now the other Cleveland Browns running back you could consider is Kareem Hunt. And he's averaging 10.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.4 rush attempts per game and 2.7 pass targets per game. Now, Kareem Hunt is projected at 9.2 fantasy points here tonight, and he's only $5,600 DraftKings salary. So the thing that concerns me about Kareem Hunt is in the past 2 weeks, his volume has come down quite a bit. Well, last game, he got 5 rush attempts and 2 pass targets under his season average. The game before that, he got 4 rush attempts and 1 pass target, way under his season average. So that's a little bit concerning, but he's half the price as the other running backs. So if he's the one to score a touchdown here tonight, he will become a good play. So I like Kareem Hunt here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, now the stud on the slate for the Cincinnati Bengals and the running back in the best spot here is Joe Mixon. And the Cleveland Browns, they have a middle of the pack defense overall, but they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing running backs. So Joe Mixon has averaged 14.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 17.3 rush attempts per game and 5.1 pass targets per game. So pretty nice volume there, and he's on the field for 73% of the snaps. Compare that to Nick Chubb, 54% of the snaps, and Kareem Hunt, 48% of the snaps. So Joe Mixon getting a bulk of the snaps, touching the ball 44% of that time. So Joe Mixon is projected at 17.8 fantasy points here tonight. It's above his season average, and he's $9,400 DraftKings salary. So Joe Mixon has scored 18, 17, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 17, 8, and 14 rush attempts on top of 3, 5, and 3 pass targets. So I like Joe Mixon here versus the Cleveland Browns. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So most expensive wide receiver on the slate is T. Higgins from the Cincinnati Bengals. And the Browns, they have a middle-of-the-pack defense defending opposing wide receivers. T. Higgins has averaged 13.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.3 pass targets per game. Now, he's been on the field for 61% of the snaps, projected at 17.1 fantasy points here tonight. He's $8,000 DraftKings salary, and T. Higgins has scored 14 and 11 fantasy points in his last 2 games off of 7 and 10 pass targets. So I like T. Higgins here versus the Cleveland Browns. Now for the Cleveland Browns, their stud wide receiver is Amari Cooper, and he's averaging 15.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.4 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 84% of the snaps, projected at 13.3 fantasy points here tonight. He's $7,600 DraftKings salary. Amari Cooper has scored 10, 14, and 21 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 4, 12, and 12 pass targets. So I like Amari Cooper here versus the Cincinnati Bengals.
Real quick guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL. NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet. that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, now if you want to come down in salary and play a Bengals wide receiver, take a look at Tyler Boyd, and he's averaging 14.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.4 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 81% of the snaps, projected at 14.1 fantasy points here tonight. He's 6,400 DraftKings salary. Tyler Boyd, he scored 33 fantasy points last game off of 9 pass targets. Then he scored 13 and 6 the 2 games before that, off of 6 and 4 pass targets. So I like to see the volume and the production. He's been a consistent player throughout the season, although he hasn't had a big day like he did last week. So hopefully they will throw him those long balls and he'll be able to pull him down. So I like Tyler Boyd here versus the Cleveland Browns. Now, if you want to save some salary with a Cleveland Browns wide receiver, take a look at Donovan PeoplesJones. And he's averaging 8.4 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets an average of 6 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 85% of the snaps, projected at 9.4 fantasy points here tonight. He's 5,000 DraftKings salary. Donovan PeoplesJones has scored 12, 12, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 6, 5, and 7 pass targets. So I like Donovan PeoplesJones here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, if you're looking for a deep sleeper pick, take a look at David Bell. He's only 2,400 DraftKings salary. He's from the Cleveland Browns, and he's only averaging 2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 1.3 pass targets per game. This is a guy that's going to see 1 to 2 pass targets. He scored 2 fantasy points consistently in the last 3 games, so he's been on the board. I think he would be your best bet for a sleeper pick. If you want to somehow stack your team with studs and you need that salary, want to take the shot that one of those 2 targets, David Bell, finds the end zone or breaks one for a long run. So he's a deep sleeper pick. So I think he's worthwhile though here in a slate where there's not too many sleepers on it. So I like David Bell as a sleeper pick here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. For the Cincinnati Bengals, you have Hayden Hurst, and he's averaging 9.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.6 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 67% of the snaps, projected at 9.5 fantasy points here tonight. He's 5,200 DraftKings salary, 1,400 more on FanDuel. Hayden Hurst, he has scored 11, 5, and 17 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 8, 3, and 7 pass targets. So I like Hayden Hurst here versus the Cleveland Browns. Okay, now David Njoku is out for the Cleveland Browns. Now this guy has actually been priced pretty good for this slate. So the backup tight end and actually the only healthy guy on the roster in terms of tight ends or that will be active tonight, you have David Njoku out, Pharaoh Brown, who is questionable. So take a look at Harrison Bryant from the Cleveland Browns. Now, he's only averaged 3.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 3 pass targets per game, but he's been playing behind David Njoku, so Harrison Bryant could get a handful of targets here. If you need to save that 1,200 salary coming down off of Hayden Hurst, or if you want to stack these tight ends, I like Harrison Bryant here versus the Cincinnati Bengals.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite
player for this NFL slate.
I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.